Hello, folks. Thank you very much. My name's Eric Bornman. I'm the Director of Guided Pathways at CLEO, and it's my pleasure to moderate this afternoon's plenary session, Artificial Intelligence, How to Harness It for Good for Public Legal Education. So our topic, should public legal educators jump on the AI bandwagon? Can AI advance access to justice? How can it help us understand the needs, improve our tools, and reach our audiences? And what are the risks and how do we avoid them? So we have a highly knowledgeable panel with us today. And by way of quick introduction, abridging the bio summaries you already have, we have on our panel Amy Salzin. Amy Salzin, we have a video image. Hi, Amy. Amy is an associate professor at the Faculty of Law, University of Ottawa. Professor Salzins has written extensively in the areas of legal ethics, lawyer regulation, technology and legal service delivery, and access to justice, including a forthcoming paper about research with CLEO on the guided pathways. On the podium here with me, we have Chris McGrath. Chris is the founder and a software consultant and designer at TangoWork, a digital consultancy based in Victoria, British Columbia. Chris is an expert software consultant and designer of delightful internet experiences, including work for the People's Law School in BC. He founded TangoWork and co-founded Thought Farmer, an intranet platform used by hundreds of organizations around the world. And we also have James Kosa. James is a lawyer and partner at Weirfolds. It's a law firm in Toronto with a practice focused on information technology and intellectual property law. James offers his clients, who include CLEO, wealth of knowledge and experience from across the spectrum of technology issues, including the protection and exploitation of computer and software technology, IT and IP licensing, privacy and security breaches. Our agenda today, Amy will introduce AI and ChatGPT. Chris will demo some use cases, and starting with James, we'll have a quick panel discussion by way of a list of questions we've spoken about in advance. So finally, while we hope there will be time for questions, it is an ambitious agenda, so please keep in mind tomorrow's excellent workshop getting started with AI at 11 a.m., which will be a more fulsome opportunity for questions. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Amy to introduce or reintroduce AI and ChatGPT. Thanks, Amy.
Sure. Hi, can you hear me in the room? Okay, I think I saw some small thumbs up in my video screen. Great, so without further ado, we're just gonna go through some basic foundational concepts. What is AI? Let me get my slides advanced here. So I'm sure in the audience, I talk to a lot of audiences about AI. There's a wide range of perspectives and experience on the topic. So some of you, when I say AI, you may think about a super intelligent robot, perhaps. Or maybe people come from a computer science background, and for them, they think about AI kind of from a technical perspective and think about lines of computer code. Or maybe your life is quite busy and you don't actually spend a lot of time thinking about AI. You have your job, and that doesn't involve necessarily AI on a daily basis. You have your home life. And so recognizing that in the room and also in the webinar, we probably have people coming from a variety of perspectives. We wanted to make sure we started with some table setting. I certainly know that some people in the room have deep expertise in technology, but we also heard from people that wanted to hear, some of the basics. And so we're going to start for not too long, but just for a little bit on, from ground up and setting the floor for people's knowledge here. So defining AI. One place I like to start is just to recognize that AI is a bit of a term of art. One definition of AI talks about AI being sort of whatever hasn't been done yet. Another definition that you can see is AI involving using computers to do things that traditionally require human intelligence. In both these definitions, you kind of see an idea of boundary pushing. You see maybe an idea of things being a little bit futuristic. As we come to have kind of more and more statutes and regulations about AI, we do have some more technical definitions. I'm not going to offer you kind of all those definitions that exist. Just to point out that a lot of those definitions do talk about systems that do things autonomously, or systems that can themselves learn. And so that kind of speaks to a more type of advanced technology. At the end of the day, when I talk to audiences, whether it's justice system stakeholders or lawyers or judges or law students, I often say, we don't have to worry, on agreeing on any one specific definition of AI. What often is more important is when you're talking about using a particular tool, or you're talking about a particular use case, you have some basic literacy about that particular tool and that use case, understanding what it does, what are the benefits, what are the risks. That's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. It's been a big year for AI, and a lot of that is because of generative AI. Maybe a term you've heard before, maybe you haven't. A very simple definition that I think works well for our purposes is talking about AI systems that are capable of producing content. So whether it's text, images, or video. That's kind of a basic definition of generative AI. So the type of generative AI that produces text, so words as opposed to images or video, involves the use of something called a large language model. ChatGPT, which you may have heard of and we'll talk more about today, is built on top of a large language model. What is a large language model? It's a model that uses that thing that I've referenced before, machine learning. And it's a model that can recognize, translate, predict, analyze, generate text. And it does that based on patterns and relationships in the text that it's learned from massive data sets. So, using text from, all over the internet, so to speak. And the tools work by predicting the next term or word in a sentence, kind of based on the words that came before. That's, simplifying what the tool is actually doing, but that's a basic sense of what is going on. Yeah, and so ChatGPT is one tool, one interface that uses a large language model. Again, many people may be aware, some may not. This tool was released publicly almost a year ago in November 2022 by a company called OpenAI. It was released free to the public, though soon came also a premium version that has kind of different capabilities and features as well. And that still exists today, a free version and a paid version. What does the tool do? Here's just one quick example. We can ask the tool, give it an instruction or a prompt. And here's my slow typing, asking the tool to explain the access to justice crisis in Canada. This is the paid premium version. You'll see it gives some qualifications, but pretty quickly starts providing a fairly well organized, certainly coherent, and quite knowledgeable account of the access to justice crisis in Canada. Never claim to be perfect, but if you're reading along, if you can see from where you are, you can see those headings, you can see that a lot of the main ideas are captured here. I think it's almost done. I could have also told it to be a bit shorter for our purposes, but that's what it provided kind of when I gave it no word length or anything like that. Okay, and so when this tool became released publicly, the technology had been around for a while, but it was improving quite fast. And then we had this public release. It really kind of blew a lot of people's minds. That includes people that work in AI. Type of capacity this tool had or demonstrated with language was really impressive. And things were being done that people thought, maybe they didn't think they were impossible, but they thought maybe they were years off. And so quite impressed with what people saw with that tool. Again, less than a year ago. People, as this tool came out and started experimenting with it, and when people, with knowledge talked about the tool, they also noted some limitations. And I think we'll get into some limitations in addition to benefits more later. One type of limitation is called hallucination. Maybe it's a term you've heard before, maybe not. Some people don't like this term, they use other terms, but essentially the idea is that this tool that generates language can also generate false statements. So it can kind of fabricate information to people. Here's an example based on something I did with a tool last spring, where I told it, can you give me an example of a Canadian legal case where the judge used a pop culture reference? It's a topic I've been interested in. And so you see those 3 kind of short paragraphs there, talks about the Federal Court of Canada. I think a judge that sits on that court, and gives an account of what looks to be incorporated reference to Moby Dick in the judgment. The problem was this case actually doesn't exist, or I certainly couldn't find it. And so it seemed to be an example of the tool doing this kind of thing where it puts language together that's coherent, that sounds possibly right and compelling, but doesn't actually refer to something that is real. And there's other examples of that, like professors having the tool saying that they wrote articles they didn't write and things like that. I won't get into detail, but also a high profile example of a lawyer using this tool in the United States and then presenting half a dozen fake cases to the court, caused a lot of controversy and uproar. The lawyer was sanctioned. Not a widespread phenomenon, but we've seen this pop up here and there, this problem with fabrication. Why is this happening? I think, getting to talking about what this tool is doing, it's, basically, according to this reference, an account by Stephen Wolfram, it's trying to basically produce a reasonable continuation of whatever text it's got so far. When reasonable, we mean what one might expect someone to write after seeing what people have written on billions of web pages. So it's putting together something that sounds like it goes together, oftentimes to great results, but sometimes to some pretty strange results. When I talk to people about this type of technology, I do think it's quite important to recognize that ChatGPT is just one particular tool. It's just one general purpose tool using a particular type of technology, this large language model. You can use the same technology, the large language model, and there's a few different ones at that, to make specialized trained tools that have different guardrails. And these tools, and there's a lot of development in the legal tech space, use certain techniques or measures to try and get at that trustworthiness problem. Oftentimes pairing the tool or incorporating or tethering the tool or grounding the tool in known accurate sources of information. So really directing the tool to say, don't just put any words together, look at this information we know is accurate and use that to create your answer. And I know we'll hear more about that kind of in a very practical way as this panel goes on. Other things to point out, I think, with this type of technology, I think it's really important to understand that there's no kind of one broad story you can tell. What risks are going to exist depend on exactly what you propose to be doing with the tool. So, I showed some limitations of ChatGPT, but there's certainly many safe and appropriate uses, even in a professional context with this tool. Not every use is going to raise that concern about hallucination, but if you're using the tool just to help you edit a certain amount of text, and we'll see an example of that soon. In some cases, even if you're looking for substantive answers, you may be in a capacity to double check what it's saying. Maybe you're just looking to brainstorm or think outside the box. And also not all use cases, even for people in the legal space, so for public legal education organizations, not all use cases are going to involve kind of producing substantive legal information or substantive legal answers. I often talk in the access to justice space about a capacity boost. So thinking about offloading maybe some of those admin tasks that take up a lot of time and allowing people that work with the organization to work on more higher order tasks. And again, I think we're going to get really into some great practical examples of that. That is a very short and quick overview of AI and generative AI and ChatGPT. Spent a couple of days filling in all the gaps there. I hope that puts people a bit more on the same page. And now I'll turn it over to Chris, who can, again, start getting into some of these practical examples that I promised we'd share with you.
Yeah, I just put together a quick video that shows 5 practical use cases that you can use now as a professional, personally working in public legal information. So we'll go ahead and play the video, and I'll talk about what's going on here. So first, you can use it to provide a template. So imagine you want to submit a draft a grant application, and they haven't provided any guidelines. So I've asked here a grant application to get funding from the Law Society of Manitoba. Can you provide a basic template? And it goes through and suggests what looks to me like a good structure for doing something. An executive summary, a project description, talks about, make sure you detail your budget, explain under evaluation how the success of the project will be measured, what's your sustainability plan, and all the kind of things you would expect to find in a grant application. Now, identifying what's missing. Imagine you write that grant application, you can paste it back into ChatGPT and then ask, hey, what is missing from what I've written here? It's great at identifying that. So it shoots through here and provides a bunch of recommendations on things you might consider, as well as some errors that were made. So can you be more specific about what high impact and low cost means? Target audience, who exactly is this general public you're aiming to serve? Legal restrictions, sustainability, and it suggests some minor edits, typos, and terms that are vague. It's also great at providing recommendations like what product to use or what subject matter expert to go to. In this case, I asked, hey, we need a CRM, I think. We're using a spreadsheet to manage 2,500 clients, but we're budget constrained. What are some solutions that we could use? And it talks about open source CRMs or freemium CRMs, cloud-based ones, custom-built ones, or maybe spreadsheets 2.0, like using a more powerful thing than Excel, like Airtable or Google Tables. And it reminds me to look on TechSoup for deals on CRM software. Some really good recommendations. Next is categorization, like for taxonomies or restructuring your website. So I said, hey, here's lawfacts.org. It's currently divided into 13 categories, our FAQs. I want to take it down into 8 categories, get rid of the COVID-19 category, suggest 2 possible labels for each. So this is with the Browse with Bing feature, where it actually looks at the website and recategorizes it into navigation that makes sense. So it says you might consider financial and consumer affairs, employment and workplace, family and relationships. In parentheses, I had asked it to provide an alternative category name, and it recategorizes it all for me. This last example we're going to look at involves actually talking to ChatGPT and it talking back, which is a new feature. So listen to this. I heard a term in a personal injury case. It was like res ipsa liquidator.
It sounds like you're referring to res ipsa loquitur, a legal term often used in personal injury cases. It's a Latin phrase that means the thing speaks for itself. Essentially, it's used when an injury is so obviously the result of negligence that there's really no need for further explanation. Would you like to know more about how it's applied in cases?
I want to know, is it used in Canada or is it just a US thing?
The concept of res ipsa loquitur is primarily rooted in common law, which both the United States and Canada follow. So yes, it can be used in Canadian legal settings as well. However, the application might vary based on jurisdiction and specific case law. It's not exclusive to the US.
So there you go. 5 ways that you can use ChatGPT or these kind of things, AI now. What's next?
James, do you want to sneak in here and talk a little bit about how you can use this technology internally within your organization?
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. Weren't those presentations fantastic? I thought I was blown away. I thought it was really neat to be able to see the specific examples as well as have a general overview. And the examples you provided were great. I was told that I had to be very negative. That's not true. I'm not going to be negative. I'm quite bullish about the technology, and I'm excited to see where it takes us. The question is, okay, depending on your use case, there are things that you can do really easily and effectively with generative AI tools, and the things that maybe you might struggle to provide. The last example I found really fascinating, the spoken one, because when I've asked ChatGPT to provide legal advice, it says no. So, because of course, like why would Microsoft stick its neck out and provide legal advice? Two reasons. One, it doesn't want to get sued for bad legal advice. And two, it's going to offer a paid product at some point, I'm sure, which will provide legal advice. So in that, but if you're good about how you structure your prompts, or if you kind of get experience with these tools, you can get quite a lot of useful information out of the tool. Now, the question that you have to ask yourself is, having received that information and you're now relying on facts, like you're going to rely on that information, and you're saying maybe going to go beyond a definition and take some sort of action on it, would you be satisfied with that? Would you say, I didn't consult a lawyer, but I did ask ChatGPT for what amounts to legal advice. Can I act on that? And right now, I think because of the risk of hallucinations, the answer is probably not. Like that would be ill-advised. There are lots of examples. I use ChatGPT all the time, and I have fun with it. And it tells me things that are right, and it tells me things that are wrong. And when you are going to rely on something, then you need it to be right, particularly where there are consequences. So we look at internally. I haven't totally answered the question, but I promise I will. We can use it internally where we have a high tolerance for inaccuracy, and we're looking for cool ideas, and it's going to be subject to human review. So we play with it. Like if you think about the examples that you put together, each one of them is not going straight to market. You're going to be reviewing it. You're going to be thinking about it. You're going to be validating that it's correct and appropriate for the use, and then you'll ship it out. And in circumstances where you don't know if it was right or wrong, you might say, okay, now I need to go maybe independently check facts on a tool like that. That's where we are kind of in the tools we've looked at today, like ChatGPT and Claude and so on.
Thanks, James. So Chris, you've been doing some exciting work with the People's Law School in British Columbia. Are you able to share some of that here?
Yeah,
with us?
so we've worked on AI chatbots with the People's Law School in BC. People's Law School's executive director, Patricia Byrne. She's here. Wave, Patricia. And maybe some of you know Drew Jackson. He's their digital and content lead. So we've been working on AI chatbots for 4 years. And man, it totally changed this year. So I got a video here on my book, on my computer. And let's bring that up. Okay, so this shows what we currently have. We started building this 4 years ago. There's probably thousands of hours into this chatbot, or definitely many hundreds. Today, if you go onto the People's Law School website, this is what we have, where you can type in something like, in this example, I bought a used truck and it broke the next day. Now, significantly, we had to train it on thousands of these utterances because it's NLU, natural language understanding, and then categorize it. So it recognizes what I said there and then provides a response. And that response was written in advance by a team of lawyers. Brilliant responses in hundreds of categories. But people always ultimately type or ask something that we hadn't thought of because there's just too many potential things out there. Like this example, which I'll show you several times. I've been employed at a company for 6 years that just sold. I've been offered 6 weeks severance. I've been given 6 weeks notice. Is that reasonable? Okay, we haven't prepared an answer to this, right? It wasn't anything that we categorized. And so when we submit that to the chatbot, it says, sorry, I don't understand. We don't have anything written for that, right? So then fast forward to this year when large language models became readily available. So we plugged it in and made a prototype chatbot. This is just a prototype. It's not released to the public. And we were interested to see like what kind of quality we could get. And I think what blew us away is that in really just 2 days of development work, we had a functioning chatbot compared to thousands of hours. I ask it, hi, hello, how can I assist you today? What's your name? My name is Beagle. All we had to tell it, like no advanced work besides saying your name is Beagle, you offer legal information, you're from the People's Law School, try to source it from our website, be friendly and happy, explain things step by step. That's all we did is craft what we call a system prompt behind the scenes, and it gives this great answer. But then we give it this problem again. I've been employed 6 years at a company, just sold. They gave me 6 weeks notice, offered 6 weeks severance, and we get something inaccurate in the answer. It says that you're entitled to 8 weeks after 6 years, which actually isn't accurate in BC. You're entitled to a week a year of severance. So 6 would be accurate. So it says the wrong thing. Then we also type another prompt here. I'm going to ask it, what's the minimum wage in BC? And because large language models are frozen in time, they don't have internet access unless specifically granted, it doesn't know, right? It says, well, in 2021, it was $15 something an hour. Now it's 16, right? So those were some of our limitations. We were finding we were getting about somewhere around 90% what we would consider safe answers. Then this is where we are right now as of today. We've added RAG. It's a technical acronym, Retrieval Augmented Generation, where we've taken our known good data set. People's Law School has maybe 500, 1,000 really good articles, easy to understand, reviewed by lawyers, simply written. And we feed those to the AI at the same time as the person asks their question, a subset of those. And what I'm going to show you here is our prototype interface, where on the left, at the top, I've got a bunch of different dials that we can play with to try and tweak the answer as we're working on it. On the left, we've got the discussion, and on the right is the source articles that it used from People's Law School to answer the question. And it gets it right. It knows now that the minimum wage is $16.75 because that's on our site. It's up to date. When we give it this problem about severance pay, 6 weeks notice, 6 weeks severance, and ask, is it reasonable? It gives the proper answer. It knows that it's a week a year, so your minimum would be 6 years or 6 weeks, but then you might be entitled to more than the legal minimum, right? If considered under reasonable notice. Then we give it another problem here. How can a tenant evict a roommate? That's a tricky problem, because you don't fall under the Residential Tenancy Act in BC. You'd have to go to claims court if it came to that. And the chatbot understands that nuance. So if you want to see more about what we're doing here and some of the ins and outs and tricks of it, come to the workshop tomorrow. And yeah, I guess, what's next, Eric?
That's great, Chris. So I think next we're going to try a bit of a discussion here, but first I have a housekeeping notice. The session is going to 5:10, so we started a little late and we'll go 10 minutes over. So Chris, what do you see as some of the risks of what Chris has just described?
Sorry, me?
Sorry, did I ask the Chris?
No, you
without
asked Chris, but
James?
Chris already did a great job.
No risks.
No risks. It's great. It's great. Now, actually, Chris identified 2 already: the accuracy and the potential of getting it wrong, and how the industry is trying to address that. I attended a demonstration by Thomson Reuters, who is, for the legal services industry, going to use something very similar to what you've been creating for People's, and that they're going to use they're going to basically feed the machine things that are true, and then say, machine, please try to source your answer from the things that are true. But the machine, and this is part of what we're asking the machine to do, is still going to occasionally make things up, and it's where things are not in the machine, like in the materials that are there. That's where you're getting like 90-95% accuracy. One of the things I think we have to think about is that good enough? Like, at what point as a society are we comfortable? Honestly, I'm outstanding, but there are lots of terrible lawyers who are not going to hit 95%, right? So if the machine's doing better than people are we comfortable with that? Or are we going to hold the machine to a higher standard than we hold people? And in the short term, I think the answer is probably yes. And that's why you're going to keep being pressed for regulatory reasons, for reasons of potential negligence, for these sorts of things, to elevate your game when you use generative AI, or to maybe dumb down the use cases to a place where the risk is lower. Anyway, it's my thoughts.
Thanks for that, James. Now, this question truly is for Chris. So want to ask you about the potential of this type of AI to help people create narratives, and specifically, what is the feasibility of embedding generative AI in our direct to public applications in a way that would help people to tell their stories, and say while filling out a court form or other legal documentation? And if it is feasible, can you tell us broadly what's involved in making this happen? Just for a little bit of context, I'm imagining how Chat GPT composes narrative like you demonstrated, but as part of a document assembly tool, say like one of Clio's guided pathways. So the pathway collects relevant facts from the users using rules, but then Chat GPT helps weave it into a compelling story that will help someone's case. And there are all sorts of examples of storytelling and court form completion and document assembly. Is this functionality we can look forward to deploying as plea providers? And if yes, how do we get there? And what should we be thinking about now?
Yeah, I think that's a great use case right now for artificial intelligence. There's this articulation barrier that people have where they have difficulty expressing their problem to Chat GPT. And so it's not like you could just say, hey, now that you have Chat GPT, you should be able to fill out all court forms yourself, right? But what you're describing is some sort of rules-based intake of information where, let's say it's a tenant-landlord dispute. You can find out the name of the tenant, the name of the landlord, when the complaint was made, the nature of the complaint, and take that kind of form stuff and then say, Chat GPT or whatever engine you're using, turn this into a compelling narrative. And it will do a brilliant job of that. Right now, we could have a prototype of that in a day or two. Where that can get tricky is some of the dials. Like you need to instruct it, how long should it be? What should the tone be? But my wife works in mental health. When there's an incident, she has to be very careful how she writes it, right? She doesn't say, the person got angry and lunged for my throat. She says, the person's eyebrows raised and they got up from their chair and moved towards me rapidly, right? Without putting any emotion into it. So you'll have to instruct it how to talk about that tone. Do you want to provide two alternatives and have the user pick the one that sounds better? So there's all these kind of dials, and how do you present it as an interface? But in terms of actually generating the summary from the data, it can do that now, can do that brilliantly, and technically we can build that very quickly.
Okay, thank you. So James, so thinking about embedding generative AI in direct to public tools, how might plea providers navigate security and privacy expectations that come to us from partners like the courts or government? I know there are enterprise versions of some of this technology and other tools that are being used by larger institutions. What's the path for plea providers who might want to embed generative AI in a public-facing application?
Okay, so I think that we should separate out the ordinary risks from the AI risks. So when you're using baseline technology, today, many of you might be using a cloud-based technology, or you might be using third-party tools that are processing data for you. This is no different. So you are using a third party to process data. When you make a query to an AI tool, you're passing data to that, to the service provider, they're passing a result back to you. And there's some processing happening there from a privacy perspective, for sure. If the prompt includes personal information, then you're actually passing personal information to the tool and it's coming back. So from a privacy compliance perspective, you do have to think through that and make sure that you're on side, that you have the adequate consents that you need to process personal information in a manner that's compliant with privacy law, or to handle, if you're thinking about just confidential information, that you're handling it in a way that meets your obligations. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily different than what you're doing today. Where there may be a distinction is where the AI provider is doing something else with the data. So it's not merely that they are processing the data through a large language model and providing you with a response, but they're, say, keeping that data and using it and your response to that to further train their tools on or for other purposes. And unless you are alive to those potential issues, I can guarantee the privacy commissioner will not be thrilled if you are passing personal information through these third-party providers for uses you have not obtained consent to. It's certainly not something that would be reasonably expected. So you're going to have a compliance issue there for sure.
Thanks, James. So the next question is for Amy. Amy, if you recall, James showed us online when we were preparing for the panel how ChatGPT-4 could draft a will with just a few prompts, and it was a good-looking will. Considering the concerns and assuming that people will turn increasingly to already available tools like the public version of ChatGPT, are there new legal education needs that PLEAC providers should be thinking about? Is there a new piece of digital literacy, legal literacy that we need to start talking about with our communities and audiences?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I mean, talking about growing literacy. So one thing that New York case did very much for the legal community, it was a big eye opener that you certainly should not be using ChatGPT for legal research. And now we've actually seen courts come out with practice directions informing lawyers just the risk that they may be incurring if they're starting to use some of these tools, lawyers and self-represented litigants. And so, as these tools show this great capacity, this great functionality, I think maybe also getting the message out to the public that these tools need to be fit for purpose. And so there may be some uses for that kind of tool, but certainly a self-represented litigant trying to use that for legal research, is going to start seeing some problems potentially pretty quickly. And so I think that could be an education piece that's going to be helpful. There's one instance in Ontario of a court, and the self-represented litigant was so candid actually to indicate to the court these submissions were created with ChatGPT. The court mentioned that in the reasons and chose not to read them just for the concerns related to reliability. I think, where the important thing is going to be in the A2J space is creating trusted tools. Just like Chris is talking about creating, where you have a provider that is credible, that has the accurate information, is going to put the time into creating something that's going to work and is going to limit its use case to what's appropriate. One other worry I have is as this technology, sort of lowers the barriers to entry to creating tools, we're not going to have people there that are all as careful as Chris and all as careful as your organizations are going to be. And we may start seeing more tools in the public that are just not going to be helpful to people. And so I think that's a space to watch for as well. I think there is an element of danger there. We know legal information advice is a credence good. It's not something the public can always self-assess as to whether or not they're getting something accurate. I'll give an example that in my own life, and then I'll end and give it back to the room. But one of my colleagues said, can you put, my criminal law exam through ChatGPT? I did ChatGPT-4, the premium version. It gave an answer, and I'm like, oh, wow, this looks like an amazing answer. To me, it looked all citing criminal code provisions. I'm not a criminal law expert. The colleague who was a criminal expert said this is a failing exam. How's a member of the public going to know, again, if they're not using these fine-tuned tools, if they're not using these tools that are using, retrieval augmented generation, if they're getting something accurate? So I think there's a danger here. I think I want to be clear, a huge opportunity as well. But like I think, as it always has been in the access to justice space, we need trusted providers who are, putting the time in to create tools that are going to be useful. And when we have to start warning people about other tools, wait and see a bit. I would, certainly provide a lot of warning labels to a tool like ChatGPT. Not saying it can't do useful things for the public in the legal space, but there's a lot of dangers there as well.
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much, Amy. So just jumping off from that point, back to you, Chris. People find our information and services online, and for years, many PLEAC organizations would include search engine optimization along with outreach and other means of course, to help people find us and find our content online. If people do begin to use generative AI increasingly over traditional search, is there an equivalent to search engine optimization for ChatGPT, Bard, and other such tools? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm going to take a circuitous route to answer that question. There was a study done in July out of the University of Miami and Hong Kong University where they looked at 95 participants and they gave them a research problem to figure out. Half the group used ChatGPT and half the group used Google, and they had to figure out who was the first woman in space. Give me 5 websites where I can book a trip between Cincinnati and Phoenix, and determine which of these 3 statements were false from a 2009 Copenhagen climate change conference. The people that used ChatGPT solved the problem in 4.79 minutes on average, and the people using Google were just over 15 minutes. Both the quality was the same. The people using ChatGPT were more than 3 times faster, right? And they were much more satisfied with their experience. All this to say that we may be hitting as a group peak website traffic this year or next year. And after that, there's going to be a long, slow decline as people go to generative AI to get their answers, in the same way that we hit peak printed publications in the 2000s, probably, as a group, right? And then a long, slow decline. And so, wow, this is big, right? A big change that and Bill Gates said, we usually overestimate the amount of change in 2 years and underestimate how much things are going to change in 10. So it's a big change. So going back to like SEO and AIEO, artificial intelligence engine optimization, are basically the same, and it's about creating excellent content and an excellent user experience. Google is already using AI to analyze our page. We don't have to think about keyword stuffing anymore. Google knows what the page is about, right? It doesn't matter whether you use the word, because it knows the essence of the page, because AI is analyzing it. So you need to worry, we all need to worry about writing excellent content that's presented in a beautiful way, easy to scan, loads fast, and helps people. And that is what's going to be involved in SEO for both like Google and for AI. But I think a fundamental question is like, what can my organization provide that an AI can never provide? I don't know what that answer is, but maybe it's going to be something very tailored, very personalized, that maybe AI can help you provide faster. But yeah, you're thinking about this. Sure. Yeah, well, you're right. It can't provide empathy, but providing empathy won't get people in the front door, right? What's the problem you're solving? And then you deliver it with empathy, and that's going to be better than AI.
Thanks a lot, Chris. So thinking again about people going to generative AI to find our information and find our content, and remembering that in many cases it restates that content in the form of its answer. James, what can we do if we don't like how our content is being presented by generative AI? And is there any recourse?
Okay, so most generative AI tools, the ones that we're talking about, like ChatGPT, they're not actually copying in the sense that we are accustomed to thinking about copying content. So they're ingesting the content in the sense that that content is among the content that's being used to train a neural network. And then when you ask the neural network for a response, you should get a response that is quite similar. But it's not, there's a like, remember the dials that Chris was playing with, there are parameters to every network and how it responds. And that's part of the magic, or the cool factor in this, is that generative AIs are by design, there's an inherent piece of randomness to them, and that randomness leads to something that sounds more human. That was part of the initial research that led us to where we are today. And so I think the long-winded answer is I'm not sure that it's actually going to replicate your content. Now, it might replicate facts incorrectly, and that's something that you would be concerned about if it is giving the wrong information. And that's part of why the more reliable tools are going to be, trained in advance or assisted to get to the right answer. Just like the Thomson Reuters tool or the tool that you're working on for People's. The other part that's kind of a corollary of what you're saying is, what if you want to use content from, say, a generative AI tool on your website? So you've decided you're going to generate answers to these questions to the benefit of the public. You're going to validate them with counsel, but you're going to generate stuff. And right now, at least in the US, there's no copyright in those materials. So the interesting question for me is, you're trying to create something, a value prop for people, and other people can just copy your stuff. Like you can't assert copyright in those materials today. That'll probably change, but that's a weird result, a currently weird legal result of the use of generative AI. It's not generated by human, and so the law doesn't currently protect it. So I think that's kind of a place where I'm interested to see where that goes.
Thanks, James. And a question for you, Amy, about protecting the public. So, and I know we saw an example earlier where the generative AI produced a caveat to the information it provided, but I think there's a chance here that the technology will, in instances, effectively begin to provide legal advice, perhaps. If that's the case, is there a need to regulate this eventually? And is this something lawyers should be looking to their law societies to do, or is there a better or more practical way to do this?
Sure. I mean, I think, after a few high-profile incidents and right from the get-go, OpenAI, who provides ChatGPT, is tried to make it careful that people don't get legal advice. Obviously, there's ways of kind of jailbreaking that and having different queries that amount to something that seems like advice. Their terms of use say that you can't use it for legal advice, so they're trying to cover themselves there. At the end of the day, I think, when we move, of course, between this kind of gray line from legal information to legal advice, Canadian law societies absolutely have jurisdiction over that. And bar regulators in North America are looking at this. The California Bar Association's looking at the unauthorized practice implications here. Where that may come to be more of an issue, and here, it's kind of pure speculation, but if you do have providers that are developing kind of legal specific chatbots that are clearly purporting to provide advice, and certainly if those tools are poor quality and posing risks, we may see Canadian law societies, move against those tools. I wanted to pick up on something else, kind of legal ethics and talking about ethical perspectives. And I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I just wanted to nod. There's a whole field on AI ethics that people are pretty familiar with. And a lot of what's being talked about there with generative AIs, certainly that copyright question, the privacy questions. But, there's also huge questions related to environmental impact. There's huge questions related to labor. And so we often kind of think of these tools just as computer code, but to create ChatGPT, there was, offshore labor that had to look through, for very low wages, a lot of problematic content to create these tools. There can be concerns about bias. We certainly see that in the generative AI creating images. And so that's just another part of the conversation that maybe we don't, want to completely remove from our minds. At the same time, thinking about the opportunities that are here and thinking about the profound unmet legal need. But there's a whole question about, ethics and legality. That's also, another conversation that's happening. And I just want to make sure the audience was, if they're not aware of that as well.
Thank you very much, Amy. Perhaps we have 10 minutes. Maybe we'll ask for some questions from the audience if
Can you train an AI device to prefer your own content? you train it on the content that's produced by the organization. And if that's different from what it finds out in the whole world, it tells you.
Yes. Essentially, that's what we're doing at People's Law School. We take all of our content and generate vectors. We pass it in advance through OpenAI, which owns ChatGPT, in advance, and it turns it into a language that the AI understands. And then when the person asks something, we then take what they ask, turn it into a language that AI understands, check it against our database and say, extract the nearest hits from that, pull it out. And it's not a search engine like we're used to using. It's a semantic search engine. It's about the essence of what the subject matter is. And then it feeds that back into OpenAI and say, hey, we've grabbed this subset of knowledge. Now answer the person's question from this subset. The reason we can't give it all is because you pay for every kilobyte that goes in there. And in fact, it can't do more than 32 kilobytes right now is the absolute maximum. We can't give it everything, right? We can only, we're dealing with this limited menu. And yeah, we pass that in and then it processes an answer. And then it's for you to decide as a business, what do I do if there's nothing in my database? Do I let ChatGPT come up with an answer, or do I say, don't answer this?
The Thomson Reuters is doing the same sort of thing. So if you asked, and this tool will come out next summer, and I'm not on the payroll. I'm not sure that it'll work well, but it's just interesting that they've independently come along to a similar kind of analysis. So if you would ask a legal research tool, hey, in the future, how can you answer my legal question regarding this? The first search would be, in fact, the Westlaw database, and it would return cases that appear to be relevant to the result. And then as part of the query that goes to your generative AI tool, it frames that up and packages up in a way within the 32,000 character limit and kind of asks it a clever question. And hopefully you get something based on the materials that are there that's accurate. The accuracy apparently is pretty good. But they also try to do give you some level of confidence in the results, because the tool is trying to identify when it is drawing from the material in the query and when it's deviating from the material in the query. Yeah, that's where it's at. So very similar kind of approach.
Can I
pick up on something that, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think this question, the residual error rate when you use some of these techniques is going to be the key question for more complex legal applications. And everybody is working on this, using all the legal tech companies are knowing that they need to do something like this to make sure, pairing it with accurate knowledge sources. You know, in terms of how other companies are faring in terms of the residual error rate, there's a company, a Toronto-based company that's very well financed that works in the tax space and generative AI. And in a public interview, they said, you know, on this issue, they've been working on it, devoting a lot of money, and found that they've been able to tell the tool to say, I don't know, when they don't know. But the tool originally had 50% I don't know. With a lot of work, they've got it to 30%. And maybe that's because it's more complex tax type questions. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see where, you know, these use cases can go with residual error rate. And I think a lot's going to depend on how complex the tool is going to legal questions and what the use case is. But both on confidentiality and accuracy, there's a lot of money and a lot of attention being paid to this, because people understand in the legal space, you know, there's some number, but we know 80% or 60%, that's not going to cut it. We need a high degree of trustworthiness.
Thanks, Amy. Gina, Katrin, did you?
It's sort of been dealt with just now, but I find all this very exciting. But validation processes, bias checks, I think are so important. You know, who cares if your legal advice is wrong, because then it's ineffective. You know, really. So, so I think, you know, this is great, and thanks. And I think it'll be really important to talk about validation processes. And just so you know, Chris, res ipsa loquitur is an expired legal doctrine in Canada as of 1998. Large.
Interesting.
I also want to say I find this really exciting, and I agree. Like down the road, there's gonna be something, right? But every time, James, you open your mouth and you're talking about your project, all I hear is dollar signs, dollar signs, dollar signs, right? Like the work you're doing is really expensive, right? So, so then, well, you don't have to answer that. Like I'm not asking for a dollar figure, but I guess the question I have is, as a larger community, access to justice community, how do we as a community work to develop something that's available to everybody? Because a lot of small organizations like mine would never be able to do this. We just don't have the funding or the ability to do this. So how do we make if this is the future, and if it is going to be verifiable and accurate, how do we make it open for the access to justice movement?
Maybe I could just put a slight, so if you were to be advising us, what would be our first steps in the journey to building a PLEAC generative AI engine with all the guardrails and everything else that we want?
Step one is to use it personally and to get a good understanding of its capabilities, and don't even go down that road.
Yeah, step two is probably, I mean, it is going to be expensive, and you are not going to be training your own AI tool. So the back engine of these things is trained. Okay, so what GPT-4 is allegedly trained on 1 trillion data points, apparently. Like it astronomical amounts of money to do this. So once the engine is trained, it's kind of like a general purpose computer. You're just trying to make things work around it. So a lot of what we're talking about is trying to ask it the right questions in a way that we get useful results. So that's where there's opportunity. And there's probably opportunity as a community to think about, is there a leader in the community or an organization or a group of you that say, hey, let's look at how we can say optimize the complete, let's pick a particular use case, the optimization of or assistance in completing legal forms, a certain subset of legal forms. You could probably, without a ton of effort, create a tool that is reasonably good at that, and then license it to everybody, or just make it open source or whatever. There's ways of making it broader to the community that don't involve you training your own large language model from scratch.
Yeah, which can't be done. Like the hundreds of millions of dollars to create your own language model, right? So you're feeding into it, like James said. But maybe just an idea. I know some time ago, People's Law School put forward the idea of having a quality mark on their content, and that agencies would get together and all use the same quality mark to designate that this has reached a certain standard of quality, this information. I don't know if that has legs, but if you got together and designated that for our organization, this is our known good content that has met a certain threshold, then together, if that could be ingested into what they call let's call it a database of known good public legal education information for Canada or for BC or for Ontario, and that could be fed into the large language model that we don't have control over, there might be some potential there.
Thanks. Amy, did you
I mean,
want to?
I think that's all true, and I think a helpful perspective. One space maybe to watch is CanLE, which is kind of Canada's largest legal information website. They are starting to get into the generative AI space. They just announced this week they're doing AI generated case summaries. Will they go as far to kind of have something more interactive? I have no idea, but we do have some well-resourced public providers out there, and maybe there's also opportunities for having cooperative ventures as well. But I think there's a lot of helpful thoughts about first steps here for sure.
Thanks, Amy. So we have 1 minute, so 20 seconds each. uh, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you. What about the risk of bias replication that we've seen in the use of AI in the criminal law and immigration law context domestically and in America? Cases like Wisconsin, I'm sure you're all familiar with these issues. Could you speak to that and how we could avoid those types of impacts in using AI for PLE? It's a bit different, but if we're talking legal advice, the risk is there.
Amy, do you want to?
Yeah, it's a big question. So kind of those tools you're talking about aren't, using generative AI. They're kind of looking at patterns and making risk assessments. And there's been huge problems. There's been huge problems with essentially racist and discriminatory outcomes in that. There are some people kind of looking at large language models, and of course they're trained on the internet. So we can think about Reddit, I think, is one big source of what they've gobbled up, some potential concerns. There's been a lot of human training to those tools to try and remove some of the more nastier kind of outputs. And, we've seen that, but I think it's a space to watch out for. And I think, when you're creating tests, what types of bias are you concerned about? But again, ultimately it's a tool that's looking to predict what words make sense together by looking at a lot of words humans have already produced. And so, you can see the potential there. And there's a lot of great people in the field of AI ethics thinking about these issues, and looking at their work, I think, is a good place to start and understand some of the solutions and some of the problems.
Sorry, very quick comment. I think it could also be there's an opportunity, particularly with this audience, to improve access to justice and ameliorate certain deleterious effects of systemic racism and a systemic prejudice. So we talked about one of those things earlier. If you can have people who can access justice more effectively because their forms are complete and coherent and written in English that judges like, they are treated differently than people who are writing in broken or incoherent English when writing those forms, for sure. So if you can use tools like this to level the playing field for those applicants, there will be positive impacts in your community. So I think there's opportunities here to look at those things. You just have to be aware of what the tool can and can't do.
Thanks, James. So we're a little over time, but I wanted to give each of our excellent panelists here an opportunity to share in 25 words or less, or perhaps just a few more. Everyone's going to, right, exactly. Some final words on our big picture questions today. So first, should public legal educators jump on the AI bandwagon? And second, can AI help advance access to justice? Chris, do you want to go first?
Yes. This is the internet in 1995, right? This is going to change everything.
James?
Sorry, I was just telling my kids I'm going to be late. So I do think it's absolutely transformative, and I'm excited about it. Cautiously optimistic that we'll have something exciting come out of it.
Thanks. Amy, the final word?
Yeah, I think be excited, be enthused. Also think that, we used to have kind of, there's an app for this. We don't have to actually think that there's, generative AI is going to need to be inserted in everywhere in our operations and solve every access to justice problem. I think always starting, again, like this group always does, from a people-centered perspective, what are the needs, and then what are the tools that are best fit to serve those needs? While still thinking expansively and brainstorming and blue sky and all this. But yeah, there may be some generative AI solutions that are going to be great for the people you serve. Maybe some other types of technological solutions or even human solutions that are going to be great. So, keep the whole range of options in mind, but certainly don't close your eyes to this world, because again, tremendous capacity and lots of opportunity.
Thank you very much. And thank you. Please join me in thanking all three of our panelists for. And I encourage everyone to come to tomorrow's workshop, 11 a.m., getting started with AI. Thank you.